Well, thousands and thousands of displaced civilians are fleeing Lebanon along the only land route out of the country into neighboring Syria. If they can, that is. On Friday, Israeli airstrikes cut off a main highway linking the two countries. Israel says it targeted a tunnel that was being used by Hezbollah militants to smuggle weapons into Lebanon from Iran. The UN says the highway is no longer open to traffic, but that is not stopping people from using their feet to flee Lebanon. Well, I'm joined now by Nanar Hawach. He's a senior analyst for Syria at the International Crisis Group, and he is in Dubai tonight. Nanar, it's good to have you with us. Can I first get your thoughts on what seems to be the irony of this moment? People are fleeing a war in Lebanon and seeking safety in Syria, a country that is known for its own civil war that has prompted hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to leave.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It is very unfortunate for Syrians since these or the latest Israeli escalation. They have triggered a new wave of displacement into Syria, worsening the already difficult humanitarian situation. Over 235,000 people have crossed until now into Syria from Lebanon, the majority of which are being Syrian refugees. Syria's capacity to absorb these displaced people is extremely limited, and the displacement has overwhelmed its already strained resources. Mm-hmm. On top of that, some Syrians returning from Lebanon face the added risk of arbitrary arrests and being conscripted into the army. So the new wave of displacement has only deepened Syria's humanitarian crisis, and the country will need international support to cope with this new wave. Yeah.
Nana, I know that you have been concerned that reporting on the war in Gaza has meant less news coverage of the conflict in Syria. Perhaps this is another irony. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah seems to be refocusing attention on the conflict in Syria. Do you think that's a positive development?
I would never say more escalation is something that Syria wants. I think, unfortunately, there's more focus on it just because things are getting from bad to worse. The thing is, if Lebanon becomes more unstable due to the conflict, this instability will spill over into Syria, as Lebanon and Syria's fates are intertwined. So this more, let's say, focus or attention on Syria, I don't think it's worth the cost, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything for Bashar al-Assad, the leader in Syria, to gain by taking in more and more people from Lebanon, other than perhaps the optics of good PR?
I wouldn't say that. I think the situation in Syria, or let's say being in Syria not too long ago, the situation is dire. The economy there, or the effects of the civil war are still part of daily life. And Syria is not only facing war destruction and lack of reconstruction, but a deep economic crisis. Mm-hmm. The economy has suffered since the beginning of the war and has only increased after 2022, specifically after Lebanon's economic collapse and the harshening international sanctions. 90% of the population are on the poverty line. So more people coming in the country, especially in masses, will only make things worse, will only make things more difficult for the current Syrian government. So I wouldn't say there's a lot to gain other than other than, as you said, more publicity or more focusing on the dire economic situations, I would say. That's the only positive thing, fortunately.
You're aware that some European countries have classified Syria as an unsafe country. That has implications for people coming from Syria who are seeking asylum. Do the events, particularly of the past week, with people going to Syria now, do they signal to Europe that Syria is now a safe country, that those seeking asylum can perhaps be sent back with good reason?
People are fleeing Lebanon because it's in a high-intensity war. They're fleeing, let's say, from a high-intensity conflict into a low-intensity conflict with quite a bit of issues. So people are literally fleeing bombs and airstrikes and whatnot into, let's say, a less hostile area. A less hostile area is still a hostile area. So compared to Lebanon, right now, Syria is more safe. But that's it. It doesn't make it more safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Before we run out of time, what about the role that Syria plays for both the U.S. and Iran at the moment? There are U.S. military bases in Syria and Iraq. Iran wants the U.S. out of the region. Is the role of Syria in this equation, do you think, changing?
Unfortunately, for Syria, and since the war in Gaza, the war in Gaza has underlined Syria's role as a battleground for escalations between different actors or between regional actors. We have seen increased attacks by Iranian-backed groups targeting U.S. bases in Syria's east, and these attacks have been framed as retaliation for U.S. support of Israel. So more, let's say, more escalation in areas neighboring Syria is going to mean more escalation in Syria, as it's the battleground for these actors.
Okay. Nanar Hawach with the International Crisis Group. Nanar, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate you putting things in a very valuable context for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.